morning, friends. Welcome to another. This you. Welcome to another meeting of the United Lodge of Theosophists. Um, we at this hour every Sunday have a meeting, and also twice a month, the first and third Sunday of each month, we have a study class in one of the books that we've selected to study and look into. Just going over the declaration, several things just caught my eye. For instance, this passage here where it says, "Those who desire to fit themselves by studying otherwise," and we see that this is the age of everybody is on, at least on a physical level, is running here for this fitness program and desire to fit themselves physically. But the call that Theosophy mentions is that there's a fitness on a moral and spiritual level as well. And to be able to help and teach others, one must fit oneself morally and also spiritually to carry the message forth and to be able to help and teach others. And then there's this term here, the work it has on hand and the end it keeps are too, and the view it keeps in hand are too absorbent and too lofty. Now, what is absorbing? One usually thinks of a sponge that sucks in. So what is it about Theosophy or the work that's too absorbing that causes someone to be absorbed within it? I guess it's the magnetism, the desire and the motive on behalf of those who are engaged in the work of Theosophy, in the movement, and therefore one is caught up in the current and the desire to help and teach others. As a result of that power, that force that's behind the Theosophical movement brings one into the movement, and one is absorbed in the work because of the motive and the desire. The talk for today is the new year. The reading comes from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12, and Krishna is speaking. "My devotee, who is free from enmity, well disposed towards all creatures, merciful, wholly exempt from pride and selfishness, the same in pain and pleasure, patient of wrongs, contented, constantly devout, self-governed, firm in resolves, and whose mind and heart are fixed on me alone, is dear unto me. He also is my beloved, of whom mankind is not afraid, and who has no fear of man, who is free from joy, from despondency and dread of harm. My devotee is unexpecting, pure, just, impartial, devoid of fear, and who have forsaken interest in the results of action, is dear to me. He also is worthy of my love, who neither rejoiceth nor findeth fault, who neither lamenteth nor coveteth, and being my servant hath forsaken interest in both good and evil results. He also is my beloved servant, who is equal-minded to friend and foe, the same in honor and dishonor, in cold and heat, in pain and pleasure, and is unsolicitous about the event of things, to whom praise and blame are as one, who is of little speech, content with whatever cometh to pass, who hath no fixed habitation, and whose heart, full of devotion, is firmly fixed. By those who seek this sacred ambrosia, the religion of immortality, even as I have explained it, full of faith, intent upon me above all others, and united to devotion, are my most beloved." And now the presentation.
Thank you. Friends, today's talk, as all of our talks at the ULT, based on the message of the Masters as left to us by HPB and Mr. Judge. Mr. Judge is taking some snippets from the message that was left by them, the ageless message, and today's talk will be based on those snippets. The New Year and the Crest of Cycles is a long title for today, So we find that in all ages there has been the custom of greetings and resolutions at the birth of the new year, but with a deeper meaning in the past and now. Whatever the division of the year as adopted by various peoples, the beginning of the year has always related to the return of the sun. This return brings the revivifying influences to all kingdoms of nature. These influences touch the inner life of all forms and give a renewed impetus to expansion and growth. Now, everything in nature has its rhythmic, harmonious movement. The wise ones endeavor to work meticulously with nature's law. Every gardener knows that planting and harvesting according to the natural seasons of the year brings the best results. We all know that in digging our soil and so forth. Even efforts to improve the mind, though, by study require the cooperative movement of cycles just as truly as the casting of seeds in spring. To work constructively with the law, to align one's energies with the creative ties of nature, man must be able to calculate his position in relation to each cycle. Ignorance of the meaning of the times of the cycles leads to defeat. Ignorance of the law, we get in trouble. Well, nature's law is more important, but we sometimes forget about what nature's law is. To mankind, there comes a new and fresh vigor to all channels of life from within outwards, gradually strengthening as the sun moves nearer. The ancients were aware of this fact and realized that life is one through all its manifestations. They consciously seized this opportune time to reaffirm their highest aspirations. The ancients fixed the respective festivals of the year and their dates according to the sun, the father of all calendars, and of the zodiac, or the sun god and the 12 great but still minor gods. And they became subsequently sacred in the cycle of national and tribal religions. Those who make resolutions and who send New Year's greetings with all this in mind might look back upon their successes and failures of the past year and resolve to make more strenuous efforts toward the goal of self-knowledge and unselfish effort. There are a few words that are most meaningful here. We'll write them right here. Self-knowledge. Unselfish effort. Easy to say, hard to do. We have to practice to get good at that. Students of ULT have the goal of self-knowledge and unselfish effort in the forefront as they study, apply, and repromulgate Theosophy as it was given by those who brought it. We continue to draw attention to the fact that there is a complete body of knowledge that HPB brought to the world and named Theosophy. To conserve the message of Theosophy in its purity has been and will continue to be our earnest endeavor. There are many reasons for this, a key one being that HPB's attest is the only visible means by which the genuine may be distinguished from the counterfeit. This said, ULT students do not deify or follow a person. We simply recognize a fact and govern ourselves accordingly. So whatever one's life motive may be, whether good or evil, the tides of great impersonal cycles multiply that motive 100-fold. Knowing the cycle is coming and being prepared, students of true occultism, also known as Theosophy, may benefit deeply by the influx of spiritual energy. Nothing can be done against cycles, but a whole lot can be done in them, said Mr. Judge. Man's is the task of learning to so poise himself that he possesses the power to live on the crest of each wave of life. We have to know the cycles, and then we'll have to learn to live in sync with them. So December and January are the 2 months most connected with gods and numbers. HPB said that no one should mistake the importance and potency of numbers as symbols. Everything in the universe was framed according to the eternal proportions and combinations of numbers. God geometrizes, and numbers are the fundamental basis of all systems of mysticism, philosophy, and religion. So January is associated with Janus, the god of time, the ever-revolving cycle, the double-faced god, also known as. So one face is turned regretfully toward the past, and the other stares hopelessly with a wide open eye that suggests the ignorance of the god into the depths of the womb of futurity. Engraved on the right hand of the statue of Janus is the number 300, and on his left the number 65, the total number of days in the solar year. In one hand a staff, and the other a key for opening the gates of the beginning of the year. Thus came the name Janitor, the doorkeeper of the heavens. Old Roman coins have representation of Janus befronds on one side and a ship on the other. But those who study ancient wisdom find January 4th is a more fitting day to celebrate the new year. That's Tuesday a week rather than next Friday. January 4th is the day of Mercury or Hermes or Buddha, a name whose root means wisdom, who is credited with adding brains to the heads of those who are civil to him. Also, January is under the sign of Capricornus, the 10th sign of the zodiac, and the Kumaras, which are man's spiritual progenitors. They incarnated in mankind under the sign Capricorn, the 10th sign of the zodiac. Thus, everything combines to make of January 4th a festival to be held by those who study ancient wisdom. So January 4th, in every way, is more appropriate for us to start the year in January 1, the day of Janus, the double-faced god of time service. So here it is, January 4th, Tuesday a week, which was selected by Theosophists, the esotericists especially, as their new year. Mr. Judge talked about an allegorical umbrella held between mankind and the spiritual sun, which protects us from spiritual forces beyond humanity's present power of assimilation. The canopy of the umbrella makes visible the idea that there are elder brothers protecting us until we can learn better. The handle part is placed in every person's hands, thus illustrating that we are all linked to that protective umbrella. Putting of the handle in our hands underscores the faith placed in us by our teachers, who acted with the implicit belief that the final authority rests in man himself. So this is a good time of the year to look back to our teachers in gratitude and to look forward to our opportunity to carry on with the great work of masters that come before us from time to time. Especially at this time of the new year, it is for each of us to sense the spiritual powers, to feel the beneficence of the teacher's presence, and to look with them into the principles of things. Principles are very important. We'll put spiritual powers up here because that's what we're focused on too. And the principles of things. First we learn them here, and then we got to put them in practice when we go out on our day-to-day, in our day-to-day lives. So it is time to be uplifted by the message of the masters, that we can be like them and increasingly benefit mankind as we act and learn. All that we desire to do has a greater impulsion during this season than at some other time of the year. The turning of the annual cycle is an event which has deep occult significance. HPB said, "Let no one imagine that it is a mere fancy, the attaching of importance to the birth of the year. The astral life of the earth is young and strong between Christmas and Easter. Those who form their wishes now will have added strength and fulfill them consistently." So the reason for our failures is that we do not understand our natures. We make a resolution and we forget about it and don't follow through. So we do not understand the force and influence that lie within us so far as we are physically concerned. These are inner meanings. And consequently, we have difficulty in trying to carry out our resolutions of any kind. Our first mistake is to make negative resolutions. We say, I will not drink, I will not lie, I will not smoke, I will not do this or that. The proper resolve is that I will do this, the opposite of what we are now doing. In this case, we make a direct affirmation of will. So while the other form of resolution puts us in a purely negative position, this type of affirmation puts us in a positive position. So true goodness is a positive position. So therefore we are in a positive position when we make positive resolutions. So to affect our resolutions, we must call on our will. Yes, behind will does stand desire. It is our will and related desire that we use consciously until our bodies proceed automatically, like that, what happens when we breathe and when our heart beats. We don't think about it, it just happens. But we are really controlling it subconsciously. There's also a mental phase of the will which can be cultivated by practice. Key part of our process here. So the practice is the fixed attention or concentration in certain directions capable of affecting desired results. Concentration is also a key step in meditation. So we'll put that. on meditation and the steps and etc. in more detail than we're going to get into them today. The real and true will is known as spiritual will. This spiritual will flies like light and cuts all obstacles like a sharp sword. That's what the voice tells us, and that really is it. And that's why it's so important to try to go through the process. It's a long, it could be a long process, but once we arrive, that's what happens. All powers that exist or can exist are latent in the spiritual nature. We draw from the spiritual nature in degree, but in small degree, because most of us have our ideas so fixed that, try as we might, have to see ourselves as spiritual beings. The baggage we have acquired keeps us in the mode that life means nothing more than physical existence. We're in this world all the time, and we just have to set aside and become constantly aware, eventually become constantly aware of our spiritual nature and be in that nature at all times is where this leads us to. So we were once conscious of our spiritual nature, but we grew in intellectuality at the expense of spiritual perception as we came down through the planes of matter to this plane. So this is only one plane that we live in. We live in many others. We just don't remember those other planes, or the great majority of us don't anyway. Masters do. With our intellect, we always reason from premises to conclusions, whereas the spiritual nature has the power to direct cognition. That's what we're going at. Direct cognition of the nature of anything regarded. We can see right through it and understand the whole process, what makes it tick and whatnot. If we are going to realize our own natures, we must begin at the highest point of our nature by assuming that it is and by holding the power of that assumption. What is most necessary for us is a proper basis for thinking. We need to eject false ideas of our being weak, sinful creatures because we were born that way. We need to eject the mental idol of an outside creator. We need to understand the purpose of life, to see that we are the product of many prior lives, and to recognize our evolution under law. A law both true and merciful, which operates everywhere incessantly. It is because that law operates in a round of impression that we have the tendency each year to make New Year's resolutions. We could, by an understanding and using of this law of recurrence, bring into effect those resolutions. The desire that stands behind will helps us to make our resolutions, but the resolutions will never do us any good if we don't sustain them. The mere desire will never get us anywhere unless we maintain the desire. We have to consistently exert our will by right thinking. So as we're attached to anything by thinking about it, that's the reason why. The harder we don't think about the evil things in us, the better. And we all have these two wolves inside us, as the old Indian tale goes. The one we feed is the one that wins. So the harder we don't think about the evil things in us, the better. If we think about their opposites, the evil will not have the chance to return. Desire exists in thought, first of all. Then follows action. So we have to have a firm basis for our thinking if we're ever going to express ourselves as spiritual beings. We make practical the sublime metaphysics of theosophical philosophy. So to do that, it is necessary to apply them in every phase of our human existence. We are always using our will along the lines of our likes and dislikes. We have our own pet theories or religious philosophies because they conform to our desires, not because they conform to truth or that they are an explanation of all the mysteries we see about us. That is why after so many thousands of years of what we call civilization, we have become no wiser. Still moving in the same old treadmill of life and death, sorrow and suffering and pain. Yet we are not bound to this treadmill, save as we bind ourselves by our own thoughts and actions. We are not under the necessity of following along these planes of error, as so many of us still do. There's a chance, however, for us if we understand our own natures. Perhaps all of us have the desire to understand, but many of us think to use our indomitable will to know, to think right, and to do right. So how many of us do that? And to resolve to acquire some of the knowledge that always has existed. The knowledge of a person as a spiritual being through all his fluctuations in the realm of matter. It is as we rely more and more on the self within, we begin to express and use the power which we already have, and that power is far more than we can imagine. We have to help ourselves by taking the suggestions already given in the teachings of Theosophy. These are the Master's suggestions. And then, as the sustaining power of the will is held along the line in which we desire to do, more direct help comes from those elder brothers, who at every hour of each day are willing and anxious to meet those clear-eyed enough to see their true destiny and noble-hearted enough to work for the great orphan, which is humanity. Truth, some think, is in process of creation by the adepts of modern science. Hence, all eyes are turned with hopeful longing toward the golden age of tomorrow, which someone else somehow will bring about. They may listen to the Sermon on the Mount, but then think it merely applies to other times. They then go on thinking that goodness is a naive idea, self-control is unnatural because it is rare, and that it is visionary and impractical to overcome the weaknesses of human nature necessary to achieve universal brotherhood and unselfishness. So many of us during this dark age of materialism act either as ants laying by provisions of old age or as grasshoppers in a perpetual buzz of a summer song. The selfish care of the one and the utter recklessness of the other make both disregard and often remain entirely ignorant of any serious duty toward humankind. Most of us do not conceive of the importance of our role in laying the groundwork for the future of humanity, nor will we give a thought, if we can help it, to post-mortem life. When we think about death, it is too often about the glories of heaven or the asbestos of hell. But happy are those warriors who regard death as a tender and merciful mother, helping us transition to another plane. We may well remember that the individual learns to identify himself with collective humanity only through the martyrdom of self-conscious existence. The suffering pilgrim must see in himself not only the virtues and glories, but the woes, sins, and failings of all the rest of mankind. Most of all, the suffering pilgrim must not succumb to today's heresy of separateness, which is what we are too often living in. The cycles of nature help to their courses, and the year is born. The cycles of nature keep to their courses, and the year is born without man's yea or nay. But saviors of the world are born by will. The cycle of the Buddha is begun by himself, bringing to birth a new age for all the world. And we all can be Buddhas in the making. May we use our indomitable will at the crest of this New Year cycle to redirect ourselves to our goal of self-knowledge and unselfish effort. As we serve others and as we send our sincere greetings and best wishes to every living creature, including our enemies. Thank you for your attention, and now I'll turn the floor over to questions and comments. Pass the mic, please.
Oh, thank you. When we think, as you directed us to, when you pointed to, the fact that this is a natural occurrence every year, there's this, we might say, in the astral and psychic atmosphere of Earth, a brand new beginning. And to see ourselves, again, as you pointed us to, as part of that. It's not happening outside of us, although we can note it in the heavens. The question then is, how do we best continue this as the year goes on, so we don't, on July 10th, wake up and say, oh, if only it were January, I could go back to my original resolution.
Good question. Focusing on, first we have to have a fundamental understanding, and not an intellect, not necessarily, well, of course intellectual too, but it's really a spiritual understanding of the laws of nature, and understand as above, so below. As the universe is, so we are. It's so, you know, we've gotten away from that and now coming down into nature, but that we are that. And it's in terms of recognizing this principle, it seems like then we would, if it's constantly aware of that all year, we would not venture away. If we are positive in our thinking, positive in our resolutions, it's okay. I learned by my errors in the past and so forth. I will do this in the coming year, and stay with it in our concentration and meditation. Those who meditate, and eventually we will learn to meditate 24/7. The student understands. Then we're with that current all year. Nature's current would then be our current. Right now we kind of get out of sync because of our going off on a tangent sometimes in this process of coming down into nature. You had another question?
Well, just to add to that, because it came to mind as you were speaking, an older student of Theosophy said some years ago, it's always dawn somewhere. So when we get into our dark cycle of gloom, to think that, yes, the sun is always rising and bringing, of course the sun doesn't rise, but there's always that reawakening within us that's possible. And I think that's a helpful little slogan along the line of it's not just January 4th. It's this continuous awakening up.
Process. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's not just do it today and right. What you were saying brings to mind a lot of things, and you talked about the dark side. Well, there's one student in his own words says the devil is part of the all too, and that wolf, the old Indian tale, the wolf within us, always tempting us to do things. It's very beneficial to us to realize, hey, we don't want to head in that direction. Let's cut off that way of thinking or that way of doing, and replace it with something better. So that would be the student's partial response. He probably will think about it more after the talk and remember some other things.
Well, just continuing that thought that you mentioned, the wolf, but that's already within us as well as the other side. So whoever constructs the human psyche, the human spirituality, that wolf is there for a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So a relative purpose, since all this is relative anyway, outside of the absolute. So then that umbrella that you spoke of, that is protecting, so it's also protecting the good and the bad in a sense, because you need the good and the bad, like in the light of the path, the vices and the virtues are stepping stones.
The sun shines everywhere, right? When
Yeah.
it shines,
So I was just trying to,
I'll hit on this person and not this person. So.
I was just trying to not just cast in a totally negative sense the wolf, in a sense. The wolf is a teacher as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. We have that choice, just like Mr. Judge pointed out in his example. We have the choice to hold on to an umbrella or not. Or whatever. And if we can stay under that umbrella, I guess, and venture out into negative territory. But if we go out too far, then that's a different story. But yes, right. That umbrella protects everything. It gives us a chance, as the student here said, indicated. It gives us a chance to, go back and rethink our steps and turn it around.
As a follow-up.
It's a never-ending process, if you will.
As a follow-up now, in reflecting, for instance, the past, if you've gone through rough times, hard times, those rough times sometimes, most times, make you stronger. Those running into those holes, pitfalls, and things like that. But at the same time, it's the teachers tell you to forget your past, to move on. But those very things that make you stronger, incidents that, one time when you confronted that, you thought maybe, oh, this is impossible, stuff like that. But then you weather the storm, and then you can reflect, on that past experience. But at the same time, they tell you to forget it. But at the same time, it strengthens you in a sense. Seems to be a little dichotomy right there. That was, I guess, maybe a comment more so than a question.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to constantly try to build on it, I think, is what you're getting at. Don't let it get you down. It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Everything that comes in life is really an opportunity.
You talked about desire as something that should be, I suppose, refined. We should apply desire in a positive way. And this student recalls this very brief two-word sentence in the voice where HPB says, desire nothing. Can you talk about what the difference there is?
What comes to mind with this student when you said that is there's this higher level desire. We're talking about the desire is a selfish desire in terms of desire nothing. We act, our ideal, and that's what we want to get to, act to the benefit of all, to help others. Okay, that desire there is universal. I don't think we're talking about that desire, and one student's got a hand up. She'll bring it, but come in a minute. We're talking about the desire on a selfish level, you know, to have something better than a neighbor and so forth.
And perhaps it's the two wolves. The two different types of desire are the two wolves, and it depends on which one you feed.
The good wolf and the bad wolf. You know, it gets it down, gets it real simple.
You know, there's a, excuse me, a lovely quote from the little book Light on the Path, where it says, the desire, the power of the disciple shall covet is that which makes him appear as nothing in the eyes of man. And again, you start thinking of the sevenfold nature of everything. So we, in this society, as you pointed out, we concentrate so much on the emanation, the practical, the everyday, what we would call the lower self. It doesn't mean lower bad, higher good. It just means there's all these 7 aspects. So thinking of that highest aspect that's non-personal. So it's, in a sense, the non-personal and the personal. And you need both, which gets back to the two wolves. That idea that without Lucifer, without the fall into matter, nothing would happen. And so how do we see that paradox as the conundrum, so to say, of being human right now?
I hear your thought. I think the student here wanted to add to it. Okay, how do we see that paradox? It's a conundrum. Yeah.
But here, I think the important part is with which principle do we identify with?
Exactly.
Thou art that, so if we are that, then that's the real. The other is temporary or evanescent. So if we identify with the temporary, at the end of one life, it separates itself from the individuality. But if you identify with the individuality, in time you get to know your inner self. And that's very important to keep in view where we are applying that willpower to constantly remind ourselves as to who we truly are. And the other part of that is that this is the most material that we're ever going to get. In fact, we have reached the middle of the 4th round and we're ascending towards a spirituality.
You're talking about a larger cycle now than
Correct.
the annual cycle. Mm-hmm.
Correct. But what we need to remember is that immersion into substance has happened. And we are now in the ascending cycle. We don't have to make it dark black. Contrast is necessary, but we can make it light gray and move out of it towards the spheres that we need to go. Because the highest material achievement has already arrived. We need to work on the others.
Yes. And as we circle back up, and you're talking about the process of becoming spiritual again, it's up to us to learn how to cope in that environment that comes next. So it's not a situation where we have limitless amounts of time to do that. We have to work with nature to learn to work with nature. I mean, it's important to remember that too.
No.
Yes, we're under that allegorical umbrella, but it's not going to be there forever. We have to learn to stand on our own 2 feet and become a Buddha. There's other okay.
Yeah, you have on the board there, and you've mentioned it several times in your presentation there, spiritual powers. What exactly is a spiritual power versus someone like, say, a psychic power? What are spiritual power? I know will could be, say, if will is spirit in action, then that's automatically understood as being a spiritual power. But beyond that, maybe the power to think, but could you just delineate what are spiritual powers?
In a word, if we get personal versus impersonal, a spiritual power is a power to see into things as in an impersonal way, and to be able to act for the benefit of all, that seems very impossible. If you stay with the intellectual mode of thinking, that seems impossible. Not to kick intellectual modes of thinking, college and so forth is important. As much trained as you can get. But the point is, we have to think differently than we are now. Not just about ourselves, but about everything around us. And bottom line is, if we think that way, we're also benefiting ourselves because we're part of it all. So we're not left out either. But that's the, I guess it's something like you can only say so much about spiritual powers. You have to, constantly be after it. And it takes possibly eons of time to develop that. I don't know. The student doesn't know. The student's trying to do that himself. So.
Okay. Well, for instance, like in this new Star Wars is just out, and Star Wars. Then when they say the Force be with you, okay? Now that Force that they say, is that a spiritual force, or is that when they say Force, is it? I'm just questioning, throwing it out there. Is that may the Spirit be with you, like the preachers may say in their service and stuff like that? But
that's the inner force.
Okay.
You're talking about there.
Where?
The inner force being
the preachers?
No.
Like in Star Wars, may the Force be with you. All this.
Thinking that's because Joseph Campbell was very much into the early Star Wars anyway, and he was I don't know that he ever mentioned the word Theosophy, but he seemed to be very, in this student's understanding, very much along the lines of thinking of HPB. But this is being in tune with nature. That force. When you are in tune, then everything in nature gets on your side. It says in the Gita that, not in the Gita, the voice, that if you work with nature, she opens her secrets up to you, and there you go. That's the force we're talking about here. This student's understanding. Now, Star Wars kind of gets, it's a story, but still, that force that's what this student is reading into it.
Okay. Well, I just want to go further. But now there's like,
go ahead.
like Kundalini, okay? We're all familiar with Kundalini. Now, that would be more like a spiritual force, whereas it seems like, I guess it's your motive, as you mentioned again, if you are on that level, caring for others, then it automatically transcends more like the psychic realm. So, I don't know, like telekinesis and being able to do all these things, they all comes from the spirit in a sense, but I guess it's the level that you're using them on or applying them could denote the difference between the psychic and the spiritual somewhat.
So Star Wars is a good example. We have Darth Vader, and we have Luke Skywalker. That's where we started out anyway. We're looking for Luke Skywalker in this last one, I believe. But that's may the force be with you, meaning may you act for all, and nature will be on your side.
Too.
Yeah.
In her last school, public appearance.
Who is that? Maybe
Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton. Yeah.
Yeah. So he mentioned that.
It's the motive power that
Motive
matters.
is exactly.
It's the motive
That's where everything starts.
No, but in this case, if you're using that power and something personal interjects itself into it, it immediately becomes a psychic power. It no longer is a spiritual.
Exactly.
That needs to be really understood. That to give that personality up altogether, that no thought is in your mind or in your heart when you're conducting yourself for the benefit of all. If you have a hint of something that is personal, the force then becomes psychic and it changes.
Exactly.
Just a quick historical note on Star Wars. You mentioned the early movies and Joseph Campbell, and there was a lot of emphasis on this idea of the Force and the Jedis being kind of a religious order, that it was a spiritual path. That translated into the real world, into people actually forming a kind of pseudo-religion around Star Wars and around the Force. This was an unexpected event in the minds of the creators of Star Wars, and for the reboot movies, for the 3 movies that came as prequels to the first 3 that were made, they introduced a scientific test for the presence of the Force in someone. It was just like a lab test they could do for I think they're called midi-chlorians or something like that, essentially carnalizing the entire idea of the Force. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but that's of course where we get the origin and backstory of Darth Vader, who of course is where it all falls apart. And so whether it was how we interpret fiction and bring it into our lives. I mean, there's people who make religions out of almost any kind of popular culture kind of meme, but with Star Wars, there's a really interesting history there where they made a conscious decision to make it a physical thing instead of a non-physical thing.
Yes, it's kind of hard to see in a movie the physical. So, but yeah, thank you for that input. The student was seeing this Darth Vader as someone who was maybe an advanced being in the spiritual world, who maybe had fallen after they had learned a lot.
Well, it's interesting along this line. In the Gita, at some point Krishna says, excuse me, over time the mighty art is lost. And the original script of the very first one, the first Star Wars, the person who wrote it was very well aware of both the secret doctrine and the voice of the silence. That person did not stay linked to the subsequent. So what we're all picking up on is, yes, there is a real difference when suddenly that's how religions get crystallized, and the emperor takes over, and we have what's happened to Christianity, where the money motive comes in. So again, getting back to ourselves, how do we watch ourselves so that doesn't happen? In HPB, and I don't know where it is, but she says something really great about every allegory, every myth worth its salt can be looked at 7 different ways. So if we look at ourselves in that way too, I think it's a fascinating thought. How do we not start looking, I'm studying Theosophy for my own benefit? Just like the new guys who were writing the new script said, okay, we'll make it more, more jazzy for folks. It just brings out a lot of really interesting aspects of this work.
Yeah. So that's a very, very important point. How do we study Theosophy, and how do we apply it, and how do we avoid becoming concretized in this as well?
Actually, that Dark Vader story shows how the spiritual becomes psychic. Because in that particular episode, he was concerned and afraid for his wife's well-being. And when you put fear into it, what is it that what we're supposed to get rid of? Fear. Mr. Judge has an article on those aspects that we need to totally get out of our selves and become fearless. HPV says you have to become fearless if you want to walk on this path.
So if we fail to act, sometimes it's as bad as as acting in the wrong way. In fact, it's maybe even worse. And if we are fearful, we become immobile and we don't act properly. Great immobilizer. Any more questions? Comments? Oh, another.
This conversation brings to mind another interesting fact, without getting spooky about it. But you start thinking about the Harry Potter series, a number of things that are out there now, and you start thinking about the question for a great being, the beings we call the masters of wisdom, looking at a society and thinking, how do we keep these ideas going in Kali Yuga, in the darkest of times? Oh, maybe we influence someone, you know, in some way in the subconscious aspect of their being, to start looking at the magic in Harry Potter, the aspects of Tolkien in the Lord of the Rings series, without saying, oh, somebody rings the doorbell and says, here, I want to influence you, to think about the inner realms in which people are open enough and how that then continues ideas that would get lost. It's worth wondering about.
Absolutely.
But aren't we influenced at night? Does the students' uptake on that is that during sleep we're influenced because the mind is open to suggestion. So the masters, if they want to interject those ideas, they certainly can. And the student totally believes that help is given, because sometimes for months you're on some question that you cannot possibly answer day in, day out, and then you just say, okay, we're just now going to put it aside and let it germinate its own answer. And eventually an answer comes. Does that mean it's your own higher self? Or to this student's mind, there's really no difference between your own higher self and the higher self of another. It's the same power.
It's the same source.
Same energy, same light.
Well, since we've taken off in that direction about these powers and things, I'm just thinking briefly. At the beginning, getting back to the umbrella, and you were saying the umbrella is for protection. All right. So now, you are carrying the umbrella, so the good and bad is already within you. So what is umbrella protecting you from? And you did mention those powers. So specifically now, not being so abstract, and since we're talking beings like Star Wars and all that, so earthlings here, humanity, what are those forces that the umbrella is protecting us from?
My gosh. You want me to give you a list? No, really, I don't know, it just struck me as a global warming issue, you know. We get protected for a long time, but if we don't pay attention, you know, to the stuff going on around us, we get absorbed back into the all, if you will. And I have other hands up, so.
Okay. In the beginning of the Voice of the Silence, there's a statement that if your a thread, the inner thread, goes out and you're pulling it away from your source. There is a article of HPB's where she says that there's a possibility of that ray breaking its tie with its father ray from which it originated from. And that needs to be also taken note of, that we cannot continuously be wicked, do harmful deeds, and get away with it, thinking that we get away with it. Everything is recorded. And after life, if that's the continuation of the tendencies in the human personality, that article indicates that that ray can actually separate itself. In other words, the connection is cut off. So then we become what? A human being who is without light. The heart light is not there anymore. So in each further incarnation, if that connection is not made, what does the person become? An animal man. And I think that is a danger. And she does say in that article that there are soulless people all around us, in all walks of life, there are soulless people. This student doesn't really understand all of the implications of those statements, but it is a fact of nature, and she says that neither religion nor science acknowledges such a fact in nature, but that it is a true fact of nature.
You mentioned that the teachings are full of these warnings, and sure enough, if we don't heed the warnings, one of these days this student says we get recycled. I don't know what happens.
Well, there is a statement about, it's throughout the literature, about the self becoming the enemy of self. All right. So now, if if this umbrella again, I think it's overall it's just like the good and the bad or the two wolves. They're there for teaching purposes. Right. So if some kind of way you become if self becomes your enemy, then self is spiritual. So self knows how to teach on both ends. So these spiritual forces that the umbrella is protecting you from could possibly be, again, I'm speaking of that's self again, because everything is contained within self, in other words, right? And so if self is the enemy, so then the umbrella, your whatever you have going for yourself, is protecting you against the reactive part of self, in a sense. Yeah.
But this statement was made was that the self, the lowercase s, has become its own enemy, and if it continues on that line, it eventually severs itself from the light that is in the heart. Whatever principle, you can call it Christ principle, God in you, deity, however you want to call it, higher self, it's the same principle. And once it's severed, the protection is no longer there. You become an animal man.
Yeah, or just like the Black Magician, since you mentioned Harry Potter and Star Wars, they can fall back.
This really, you look at the Voice of the Silence, the little book that's for us, and the very first sentence, it doesn't say, "Oh, this is groovy, this is wonderful." There's a warning. Beware of the dangers of the lower powers, which is us, our own karma, and all along in all the writings of not just the books we have in this room, but everywhere, there's a reminder that this is real, and it's challenging. If it were easy, we would do it quickly. And you think about the help that's there also along with the warnings. It's not doom and gloom. It's just be watchful. Be aware. And also pick yourself up again.
Hope and responsibility.
Hope and responsibility, but there is no final, as Tanjai points out, it may not be directly addressed as often, but that there is that sense of renewal and possibility. So it's fascinating to think about.
You got the last word. Next Sunday is on the potency of sound in speech. Happy New Year, everyone. On January 4, the Theosophical New Year, and January 1, the calendar New Year.